Oh, that's a new thing from Zoom. Did you hear that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. My name's Dave Eastham. I'm Executive Director for European Alliance of Rescue Centres and Sanctuaries. Hi, Laura. Um,
Hi.
Thanks to everyone for coming, and hello to everyone who's listening to this as a recording. We've had already one webinar last year from Animal Protection Denmark that was looking at some of the successes they've had on legacy fundraising. And one thing that came up in the discussion after that was people's fears about getting involved in legacy fundraising because of the legal aspects and the paperwork and the ins and outs of how you actually go about executing that when somebody's legacy does actually come to the organization. And that although it was very interesting and great for those people who already know to hear about the tips and tricks for how to improve recruitment into legacy fundraising, there was definitely a gap there amongst some of our partners about how they actually would administrate that if and when they were successful in getting a legacy. And luckily, we have Gerard Han here, who is um, very experienced in this and has done a lot of work for AP, I know, but many other organizations in Europe in basically dotting all the T's and sorry, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and making sure that everything is done legally and responsibly and the organizations are fully covered, not just in terms of receiving money, but in terms of liabilities and everything else. So I'm going to hand over and Gerard Han will talk you through, and then we'll have a time for questions and answers at the end as well. So thank you.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Dave. I will start sharing. Yeah, this works. And okay, one second. Yeah, you now only you see the screen well, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfect.
Yep. All right. Thanks very much. Thanks, Dave, for the and Ola for the invitation by years to tell more about the world of legacies. Because indeed the webinar of Tina, which I also followed is more the fundraising, but indeed talking with Dave afterwards, there's also that question. Oops! Suddenly the organization gets that call, and someone died. Put the NGO in his or her last will, and what should you do? What can you do? How does it work? And then indeed we discussed it would be good to talk you through the process that the NGOs have to go through when receiving a legacy. But before talking about actually what you need to do or need to know, I think it's good to talk you briefly through the process of how an executor needs to execute a legacy, because then you also know as a recipient, you realize what steps need to be taken by the executor of the last will and the one who actually needs to carry out everything which needs to be done. And you also realize that although you receive a legacy, it's not on day one that you receive the money, but that you sometimes have to be patient, but sometimes that you also need to be involved in the process. Another background item I think important to discuss is the type of legacies. It's only two types, but it also is relevant for knowing what your role as an NGO is. Then I will come to the organization and knowledge pre that first call and afterwards. And I would like to share some tips from cases I dealt with, especially uh, on how you need to be in contact with the executor or the parties involved. And at the end, we can exchange experiences, deal with the questions. Although I would like to point out, for me, it's absolutely fine if during the presentation you already want to ask questions that will make it more interactive. So that's more than fine with me to if you already have questions during while I talk about the sheets.
If anyone does have any questions, just raise their hand and I'll bring you in.
Yeah, perfect. And there's a final note on the introduction. It's also one of the phrases I remember of Tina in her webinar. She said, everybody is a fundraiser. So it's not only the fundraiser in the organization, but everybody is a fundraiser. And that in my mind, it also applies for all the persons who are involved in the accepting and receiving the legacy. He or she is already a fundraiser too, because someone might have died. But around that person who died, there's family, there are friends, there are notaries, real estate agent. There's a whole world opens up, and that is a new moment of contact. And so, kind of for example, family. It's a personal moment, an emotional moment, and then when you hit the right tone and you show the right respect, people will always remember that, and that might be the start of a legacy in the future. I already experienced it regularly, that talking with an executor and dealing with a legacy, that afterwards other legacies came in because people liked the way the particular NGO dealt with the legacy. And although you think, oh, of course you're grateful for a legacy, funnily enough, sometimes people are helped by being able to leave their legacy to your organization. So in that sense, sometimes people really look for NGOs, and in the moment that you hit the right tone, then that can help for the future. Anyway, the process, I added that based on the Dutch situation. Of course, I'm a Dutch lawyer. I studied Dutch law, Dutch legacy law, but I think the basic process of receiving legacies will be rather the same in every country. Legal aspects might differ. The kind of documents you need to sign might differ, but I think the basic process is the same. And I'll just read you through it again in order to show that it sometimes can take time before you actually receive the legacy. So when someone dies, basically the first question, or the legal question at least, there are a lot of questions which pop up, but the legal question is there a last will? What is someone's last wish? And has someone been appointed to execute? And I mentioned that also to reassure you that, because the moment that you get a call and it's mentioned that you are appointed as one of the heirs of someone, often at that moment you do not have to do a lot, because the executor is responsible for the process of executing the legacy, even according to Dutch law, and I think that will work the same in many jurisdictions. The heir, the NGOs, the persons who inherit the legacy are not allowed to execute the legacy. They are not the ones who have to sell a house or sell a car or empty a house. It's the executor who needs to do that. So that's perhaps as a reassurance that you don't need to set an awful lot of steps in the beginning. For the executor, there are always two things which need to be done immediately. Think of course, it's kind of practical information, but it's a funeral and taking care of the pets. I mentioned taking care of the pets because what I see in practice, that a lot of animal welfare foundations there are a lot of last wills of people who like animals, and they often have pets. And what you quite often see, that, for example, the last will, there's a request to a certain NGO to take care of the animal, to take care of the pets in turn, or a part of the legacy, or of a bequest. I will explain that later on. But that's why I mentioned that basically the executor first needs to make a broader inventarization. Is there any legacy at all? It can also be that there are only debts. So before accepting a legacy, it needs to be clear what the legacy consists of, and only thereafter he can inform the heirs about whether whether there are assets to sell, whether there will be money. And it's only when the NGO has enough information that it can take a decision on whether to accept a legacy or not. And then the executor needs to sell all the assets, because at the end of the day, and imagine your own situation. You now probably live in a house. You have a lot of furniture. You have bank accounts. You have insurances, contracts, social media accounts. Basically, it's the role of the executor to end that. And officially, the execution of the legacy is only finished at the end. If everything has been sold, if the executor knows that there are no debts anymore. But one of the rules is also to file tax applications, and in the Netherlands, at least, sometimes it can take 1 to 3 years before the last tax ruling has been done by the tax authority. So sometimes you need to wait a long time before the executor can actually pay out the final sum. And so at the end, that's the last bullet. At the end, the executor should account for the estate. He should explain what he has done. He should show that there was a bank account, for example, with 100 at the beginning, and there's 1,000 after selling the house, and then he needs to show what money has come in, what money has gone out to pay debts, costs for the execution. And then there's a final balance, which the executor needs to divide among the heirs. Sometimes I mentioned that if the execution takes very long, then there can be a moment that the executor proposes to the heirs to pay an interim payment. For example, if he sold the house for 300,000 euros, and he's only waiting for a last tax decision of perhaps 1,000 or 2,000 euros, then it could be a good moment for the executor to say, okay, I propose already to divide 250,000 of the 300,000, but according to Dutch law, that's only allowed if all the heirs agree. Normally, they agree on receiving money, but that's a formal step which needs to be taken. I don't know. Are there any questions about this process in general?
So is the assumption that the NGO receiving part of this will would sometimes be the executor, or always, or does it just depend?
No, that's a good question. Normally, the NGO is not the executor.
Okay.
In most last wills in the Netherlands, the testator, the one who made his last will, writes down who will execute the last will. In the Netherlands, and I don't know about other countries, but in the Netherlands, you more and more see that people ask the NGO to also execute the legacy. But that's, of course, when executing a legacy, then you can do it, but then you really need to have all that knowledge or in-house, or you contract that knowledge. But you must realize that at the moment, and that's why I showed the process, if you're an executor from the moment of that the person dies until the end, then you must always be available, because someone can die Saturday night, Friday night, early Monday morning. And there are these two steps, a funeral, taking care of the pets, these are steps which need to be done immediately. So it is possible, and there are Dutch NGOs who more and more do it, but there are some who decide not to do it because it involves extra organization. So I'm more perhaps at the end we can talk more about it or another moment. But actually executing yourself in Holland, if there's no executor, then the heirs or the one heir or the various heirs are responsible for executing the legacy. And what NGOs, a lot of NGOs, for example, if there are 3 or 4 NGOs who are the heir to the legacy, they appoint someone, they give power of attorney to someone, and sometimes I do that, sometimes other organizations do that, and then they ask that person to execute on their behalf. But actually executing yourself, it can be done, but then you need to prepare the organization for it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. For knowing what you need to do after someone died, it's important to know that there are basically, I would say, 2 kinds of legacy. One is a bequest, the other is more be an actual heir. A bequest, that's more a marked out and clearly described part or portion of an inheritance. For example, in someone's will, he says, I leave 500 euros to Mona Foundation, Aap Voorpols, etc. A certain amount, but 500 euros, but can also be 100,000 euros. There's no limit, but it's a certain or a certain amount or certain assets. Sometimes people say, my bank account, for example, my bank account is for the heirs, for the family, but my house or the proceeds of the house are for an NGO or various NGOs. Sometimes shares the securities portfolio or a car or certain art. If someone has a lot of beautiful art in the house and says, well, my family is not interested in that art, I leave the art to a few NGOs, and they can bring it to an auction house, and then the proceeds are for them. So it's a defined part of the estate. And what can also be done is that someone leaves a certain percentage of the final balance of the estate, and then someone says, for example, an NGO will receive at the end 10% of the final balance of my estate. That's another situation in the number 2, and then you are an actual heir. Think of parents with children. The children are the direct heir of their parents. An heir is basically the one who follows up the person who died. So you get all the rights, but also all the obligations, and that's why you have to be careful. I will come back to that later on. But that's the difference between a certain percentage as a bequest. Then you're more like a creditor of the legacy. You will get a certain amount at the end, and you're not involved. As an heir, you are always involved because you are the one and only, or a co-owner of the legacy. So the relevance for you is to know, as an heir, you are a co-owner, but it means that if there are 3 NGOs, then 3 NGOs jointly own the house. The executor does not own the house. The heirs, after their acceptance, they become the owner, and that means also, for example, that you become involved in the sale of the house. You're involved in the decision taking, and in case of a bequest, if it's either money or a certain asset of the legacy, once you've received it, then you're out. You thank the executor and family or whoever involved, and then your involvement stops. Is the difference clear to everybody?
Yeah, it is for me.
All right. If there, so after these, the more general introduction, if you're now sitting behind your desk and think, okay, I might get that first call tomorrow, later today, tomorrow, or in a few years' time, what do I need to do? I think one of the most important thing to do, and that also relates to what Tina said in her webinar, is decide who is the first responsible to communicate after that first call. And remember that the call can be from a notary public, which is more a kind of a business person. But that first call can also come from a direct family member. Sometimes it's a daughter of someone, a cousin, a brother, or a close neighbor or a close friend. So you must be aware that, especially for those last persons, it's important to rapidly be in contact with them. So if at the reception someone the one taking the call knows that it's about the legacy, then he or she, it would be good if that person would know immediately, okay, within our organization, that person can be the director, but can be a financial person, it can be a head of fundraising, now whatever, depends of the size of the organization, of course. But know in advance who will be responsible, and think of the consistency, the long term, be trustworthy, build up experience. Because the world of legacies, working with legacies, is also work of where you become better by getting more experience. I mean, every life is different, every legacy is different, but the more legacies you deal with, the more experienced you will be, and at some stage you will even be able to help an executor or family. But it's also in being trustworthy, talking, for example, with people on behalf of an NGO. If that's every time the same person, that gives confidence to the people. They say, okay, if I leave my money to that organization, then I see the same person. It's not another person every day or every week or every year. It's a good sign. So invest time in thinking of who will build up the experience. Another item Tina already mentioned is, have a database, because legacies, you cannot today talk with someone, but someone might die in 5 years time, 10 years time, 20 years time. For fundraising, but also the moment that someone dies, it's good to have that you have the track record of your contact with that person. Also, in order to allow you that the moment you get a call from a notary public or a family member, that you can immediately check in your database whether you know anything of that person or not, and then you can also answer in a more personal way. So make sure that also when someone visited the organization or when someone called, make sure that you have a good database where you can register all that information. Because once again, the person now taking that call, perhaps in 10 years' time, is not in the organization anymore. But it's important that that information is available in the long term as well. Two more kind of legal aspects. I would say check your articles of association. For example, in the Netherlands, all NGOs have a clause in the articles of association that they are only allowed to receive legacies. In Dutch it's called beneficiaire aanvaarding, so kind of a beneficiary acceptance. And you do that in the Netherlands by laying down a statement at the court. It's very easy. It's one document which needs to be sent. It's not difficult. But in that way, you protect yourself against debts. Then you don't become liable for the debts of the person deceased. And that's, of course, what, as an NGO, you never want, that you are liable for debts of a person. So I think it's good to check whether your own articles of association have any limitation or say something about accepting receiving legacies. It's good to know, of course, that the tax situation. In the Netherlands, foundations don't need to pay if they are registered with the tax authorities and are accepted by the tax authorities, then 0% of tax is due. So that's very nice. That's also an asset or a motivation for people to leave money to NGOs. So it's part of fundraising, but it's also the question also normally pops up when someone dies, and as, for example, family members are in contact with you, then it's good to know that you can answer them what the tax situation is for your own organization in your country. And in the process of the receiving the legacy, the formal documents might need to be signed, the acceptance at the beginning. But for example, the sale of a house, then because you are a co-owner of the house, sometimes the notary wants also the formal signature. Normally, that will be arranged in your organization. Smaller or larger organizations sometimes say, okay, we don't let the director sign because perhaps he or she is away a lot, and they appoint or a second person to sign the formal documents. That's something which is good to look at in general. Are there any questions about this? If not, and then after that first call, okay, then you the one responsible calls back, and then again I come back to one of the most prominent advice in this world: be personal, be respectful. And what I sometimes say to myself and advise to others: imagine that, for example, that you are the executor of the legacy of your parent or of your aunt, and your parent or aunt leaves part of his or her legacy to the NGO. How would you like to be treated? And then sometimes there are NGOs who get a lot of legacies, and then perhaps people are busy and think, oh, another legacy. And of course, the NGO is always happy with the legacy, but the way you treat the executor, I always say, imagine that perhaps for the NGO, there's a lot of work. There are in the sanctuary, things happen with animals. There are other legacies, a lot of problems. But always imagine that for the executor, and especially if it's a private person, a good friend, or a family member of the deceased, he or she is only at that moment involved with that particular legacy. He or she does not have anything to do with your problems in the organization. And imagine that you call to that NGO stating that your mother or your aunt leaves money to that NGO. You want to have a personal treatment, gratitude. So I always have that in mind. That being important for the tone. The other thing which is important, that you immediately ask for information, check your database. It's sometimes people forget to say, okay, someone died, and then you get the name, but do you have the address? Can you find that person in your database? What did you already know from that person? At the same time, do not be surprised if you cannot find the name of the deceased. Talk with Dave and Olga after the first webinar. The question popped up: is every legacy known in advance? And that is certainly not the case. I asked a few organizations I worked for, and they all kind of said, well, that roughly, it's not a scientific date, but roughly you could say 50% of the legacies is from people we never knew. And to give an example, I'm now executing a legacy for three NGOs. One being a small NGO which had never received a legacy before, a small NGO, but they suddenly are an heir to a legacy of 1.5 million euros um, of a person. That person was not a donor of that organization. Um, but on the one hand, check whether it's the information. On the other hand, do not be surprised if it's not. Sometimes you get more information why that person chose your organization. But so again, to check the database is important. And of course, it's important to know and to ask for the last will. Sometimes people say, "No, you've been mentioned one of the heirs, and you will hear more in the future." But it's important. The basis of a legacy is always the last will. There's this document in the Netherlands. It needs to be a notarial. It's a notarial deed. There are other countries where you can have handwritten wills. But at the end of the day, you are entitled to receive that last will because your name is mentioned in it. Often, also here in the Netherlands, and I imagine in other countries, when accountants need to check the figures of the organizations at the end of the year, legacies involve a lot of money. So accountants, also in the Netherlands, more and more pay attention to the legacies, and then they ask, okay, can we receive? Can you show us the formal documents? So the last will, of course, is always very important. And the question, who executes? You must know who is authorized to act on behalf of the legacy. And if there's not an executor, then you know that there's an heir or a potential heir if you haven't accepted yet until that moment. You need to know who is responsible for acting. And what, as from that moment, what is expected from you, basically also depends on the type of legacy. If it's a bequest, mentioning, okay, your organization will receive 500 euros, then sometimes when you get that confirmation, it's enough to send a letter mentioning, thanking, of course, the executor or the family member, giving your bank account, and then the whole legacy has been dealt with. That's very easy. There can be a legacy with a house or a house in. Talking about the Dutch legacy, it can be a house in the Netherlands, but perhaps a holiday home in Greece or in Spain or in France or in England, wherever. Assets can be all over. I once had the legacy with perhaps a house in Africa in a country. Then you need to find out whether that house is still there or not. So that makes it always difficult, and also for me it's difficult to say, okay, it will work exactly like this, because you don't know that in advance. Every life is different, so every legacy is different. But there are some, I think, basic things you do need to know. But are there any questions about the organization? Olga. Yep.
Yeah, I have a question. So you said that taxes are not paid if you are registered NGO in the country. In Spain happens. Yeah, in Spain happens the same. But what about if you receive a legacy from another country? Let's say Mona receives a legacy from the Netherlands. So do we have to pay the taxes somehow, or?
If it's a Dutch, if a person in the Netherlands died and there's a Dutch last will, then it's considered by the Dutch tax authority a Dutch legacy which need to be taxed in the Netherlands. And then this 1.5 million. One of the NGOs is a small NGO in Spain. That organization in the Netherlands, you only are taxed for 0%, when you're accepted by the tax authorities. What this organization did, because it did not have any authorization, it's not registered in the Netherlands, so it did not have that tax approval of the Dutch tax authorities. However, in the year that someone died, then you can ask for that that tax approval, and that works back to the 1st of January of that year. So you do need, when you would receive today, you would get information about a Dutch legacy. Then you really need to make sure that you get the proper advice rather rapidly. So it might be necessary then to, within a couple of months, to make sure that within this year you seek this approval. And the approval depends whether you adhere to the same rules as a Dutch organization. If, for example, an animal rescue center in the Netherlands, that's if it fulfills certain conditions, then it will get that authorization. According to European law, the Dutch tax authorities should treat a Spanish organization in the same way as it treats a Dutch organization. So, but it will involve translating sometimes the articles of association. The tax authorities need to be able to check whether you meet the Dutch requirements, and if you do, then you will also get the decision. And luckily, this Spanish organization got the decision from the Dutch tax authorities that they are not that they do not need to pay taxes. And then pops up the question, of course, then in Spain, your accountant, the tax authorities might look at that amount. Suppose you get 500,000 euros suddenly, then you must, of course, make sure that amount is not also taxed that the Spanish authorities do not say, hey, that's a legacy and I'm going to tax you. But if you're not taxed anyway on legacies in Spain, I think there will be less of a risk. The main message will be make sure that you invest in getting the proper advice. Taxes are always complicated, also within Europe. I mean, we have one European Union, but taxes is a matter which all the member states always want to keep taxes for themselves, because taxes, of course, allows you to get in money. So, but there are tax treaties between the countries to make sure that you don't pay taxes in both countries. Does that answer your question, Olga?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
All right. Knowledge, yeah. And what do you actually need to do? I think one of the most important thing was yeah, I think in the base is one of the most important thing in the beginning, if not the most important thing, is that accepting a legacy has legal consequences. You become the successor of the deceased. If that person had 1 million euros, fine. Then it doesn't matter whether in what way you accept, because the 1 million is always nice. There will never be a problem. But nowadays, also with the internet, people from the outside, it can look as if someone is wealthy. But in the meantime, someone can have online gambling debts. Someone can have, there's so much more online, and that will only increase. So even if an executor says, well, don't worry, you can accept the legacy, always be careful until you get more information. And what I said before, in the Netherlands, all the articles of association of Dutch NGOs mention that they are never allowed to accept a legacy unconditionally. Even if the executor says there's 10 million in the legacy, never. In the Netherlands, you then, even with 10 million euros in the legacy, you say, no, I want only to accept in the proper way, so that I can never be held liable for debts. So that's very important. I believe it. I've seen it in various jurisdictions. That same concept exists in a lot of jurisdictions. But make sure also, when people want a quick decision, sometimes someone passed away already half a year ago and you've never been informed. And then suddenly the executor finds out that he needs the authorization of the heirs to sell a house, because the notary public said, yeah, I cannot transfer this house because the owner deceased. There are new owners, the heirs. And then if the executor says, oops, I forgot to inform them, then they sometimes send a message, oh, you quickly need to sign for the transfer of the house. Always be very careful with that. Make sure that you first fully realize what you step into. So that's very important. It's basically the first two bullets. And then, yeah, what kind of knowledge you need to have as an organization yourself. Yeah, that also very much depends on, what I said before, the type of legacy. But also you would hope that a professional executor, for example, has all the relevant knowledge to assist you in the process. But be aware that even sometimes notary publics and other professional executors, sometimes they are not aware of how things exactly work for NGOs or in general in the execution of a legacy. So even if there's a professional executor, make sure that you get the feeling whether he can really advise you well, or that you need to seek your advice from another party. I will come back to that in the next sheet. But also after the acceptance, basically the formal moment is the acceptance, and then you need to see, and that depends on per country how that's done exactly. And there's a final moment that you will sign for receiving the final amount. In between, it very much depends on what kind of legacy, what steps need to be taken, and also what control you need to exercise. Because the executor is responsible, but he will hopefully inform you, and if not, I'll come back to that later on. Then you must raise questions. So if there's a legacy, I'm also now an executor of a legacy where there's a company in the legacy. So I'm a board member of the company of the deceased, but the shareholders are now the 3 NGOs. So that's kind of then you get into company law. What is the formal legal position of a shareholder in a company? That's of course very specific. So you as an NGO cannot have company law advisors in your organizations. We have animal caretakers, you have public policy people, fundraisers. But there's no vacancy for a company law lawyer in your, and there should not be a vacancy. But in the execution of the legacy, it might come in handy at some stage that you have someone around you who can assist on that. As I said, it will come back in the next sheet. So there's no need to be a legal, a tax, or a financial expert yourself. But expertise should be sought when necessary. What I sometimes say, receiving a legacy. A lot of people, most of us will have dealt with legacy because a family member, a parent has died, a family member has died. So you don't need to be an expert to receive legacy, because it happens all day that people die and that they have heirs. The only thing and as an NGO, it's also in that sense, you don't need to be afraid of being an heir, because being an heir is something which happens millions of times, thousands of times every day. And there are a lot of legacies which are quite simple in the sense that, okay, sometimes a house needs to be sold, or there's only a bank account, someone had a rental house. a last tax application need to be filed, and it can all go rather quickly. And for that, there's no need to have financial, legal, or tax experts. It really depends on the organization, or on the legacy, sorry. But what could, there's some tips. If you don't feel comfortable, there are board members. There are, for example, smaller NGOs who have a board, and they look for someone, for example, with a legal or a financial background. And then sometimes you see that if there's a legacy, if it's really a small organization, that you seek for someone in the board who can help with the more complex, if legal questions or tax or financial questions pop up. What I see is sometimes there's the accountant or the bookkeeping agency. If there's an external account, of course the accountant is of course always external, or the bookkeeping agency, they often have experience in this field. Now there can be an outside advisor, but for example, there are some smaller foundations also in the Netherlands. Sometimes they call me 3 times a year or 1 time a year, because they don't have a lot of legacy. But if they have a legacy, then they say, "Hey, Gerrit-Jan, can you help? We will receive these documents. Can we sign them? Do you see any risk?" So that can be handy. And I mentioned, do not forget the co-heirs, your fellow heirs. Suppose there are three NGOs, and perhaps one is a bigger one, and there are 2 smaller NGOs. Don't feel embarrassed to call the bigger NGO and say, "Hey, we read in the last will that you will also receive part of that legacy. Shall we unite? Shall we share the information we have?" That's always good to do as heirs, because you're also the co-owners. Look who are your fellow heirs, and then you can share information. Or if there's a tax question, it would be, of course, silly to ask 3 tax advisors instead of 1 to help you in that situation. And then on a final note, the importance again of long-term consistency in handling. It's, as I said, it's a world of getting experience. The more you work in the field of legacies, the more experience you get, the more you recognize situations. So build up that expertise and experience just by starting. With every legacy you will get, it will get more easy to deal with it. Even to a stage at some point, if you have experience, you can be of great help to the executor, especially if the executor is I often talk to it with. There's some foundations where I'm the first person to contact in case of a legacy, and sometimes you talk to a family member or a neighbor who has been appointed executor but is not a real professional executor. And then you can help him or her very well by explaining how it works with the tax with filing the final tax applications, perhaps finding organizations to help empty your house. No, it's sometimes very practical information, but the result is always that they are very happy with you as an NGO, and that's again be an ambassador for the NGO. The more you can help, the more they will like you as a specific NGO. Are there any questions on this knowledge? How am I in time? Wait, I should go a little bit. No,
I think we're okay because we've had some questions in as we've gone along. So, and we did start a bit late as well. So it's
okay, perfect. Now, I thought about some. In general, a large percentage of the legacies, normally if you would receive more legacies, in the majority of cases, there will be an executor who informs you, who hopefully explains what he or she will do, make you accept the legacy. then he starts executing, and at the end he will send the information, the final information. But sometimes specific matters or questions pop up, or you do not hear anything. So one of the most important thing is, I think, always to make sure that in the beginning you make personal contact. It can be that you get a small information about the legacy, and then the executor kind of disappears or does not give any information anymore. If you in the beginning did not dedicate time to making contact with the executor, the more time evolves, sometimes the more difficult it will get to get into contact with that executor. So try to make real contact, that you know who he or she is, what the situation is. Also, for example, if after a year you haven't heard anything anymore, and then you say, hey, where is my money? And you did not invest time in the beginning, then he will say, hey, shouldn't we first make contact, and then you can ask for your money. But the moment that in the beginning you already invested time in, and sometimes it can be as simple as calling. In the Netherlands, there are organizations who receive a lot of legacies. And there are some which I see they only send a letter, a kind of a formal letter, thank you, and we will hear in due course, but no real contact is made. And then after a year, this NGO says, hey, we didn't hear anything, where's the money, where's the information? And then you sometimes see that executors react in a way saying, listen, you did not, now you have time for me. In the beginning you did not have time to make contact. So always look whether you can make contact, because then also the executor knows you and gets kind of a more personal responsibility to execute and to explain what he or she is doing. And then I've dealt with quite a few cases where the executor does not react anymore, and then you know that you're in someone's last will. Even sometimes you accept it, and then it's kind of the executor does not react anymore. You send emails or you try to call. And my advice, of course, a few weeks someone can be on holiday, but if once or twice after once or twice having tried to get into contact with that person, and he or she does not react, that can be a moment to think, oops, I'm not sure whether this all goes well. Most of the legacies go well, but there are situations that, or the executor disappears or does not know what he or she needs to do, and thinks, oh, the NGO is far away. I let it rest for a year or so. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are executors who think, oh, the NGO is far away, and they are not honest. They try to hide things from you. And if you have that feeling at some stage, stop sending emails, because you will not receive reaction anymore. But try to find someone or go somewhere. At some stage, I went to a notary public who didn't do anything. I went to his office, and that was the only way to say, no, I'm here in the office. I now would like to know what's happening. And it appeared that this notary public had a burnout, and he left the house for years. The whole house was empty. All the glass, all the windows were broken. People were sleeping at night in that house. The notary public hadn't done anything. And then during a year, various NGOs had tried to get information, but he never replied, or said, next week I will reply. And only after confronting him and actually being at his office, it turned out that he had kind of a burnout, and nobody else in the office had done anything about it. And the whole house, was a drama. It was the kitchen had been stolen, so there was running water in the house. Anyhow, only at some stage, if you don't trust it anymore, then there's probably a right reason why you don't trust it, and then find someone, or go yourself, or find someone with experience, or seek help to make sure that the legacy is handled, is being executed again. Another situation that I sometimes encounter is, of course, when people leave their money to NGOs. It means, and especially if they leave all their money or assets to NGOs, that means that sometimes sometimes there's no family, or the family is not appointed as their heirs. And of course, sometimes family is not happy with that. Sometimes family will try to dispute the last will and say, he or she cannot have meant this. But in the Netherlands, someone went to the notary public to make his or her last will. My advice is always, don't hide for the family. Get into contact again with the family. That 1.5 million legacy I just mentioned, there was quite a young lady in her 30s who unfortunately died at an early age, and she still had a partner, but the relationship, of course, was not working well. But she changed her last will without informing her partner and partner, ex-partner, and his family. That family and that partner, they were of course very disappointed to hear about the last will. One thing is that you can hide. The other thing is what I did, because there were 3 NGOs and one of them was appointed as the executor, and I execute on their behalf. But with someone of that NGO, I went to that family, and on the other hand, that can be it's of course an awkward situation, because there's close family or ex-family relatives. But by being open, you also show that you do not have to hide anything. You did not make that last will. It was that person who made the last will, and that you only can respect the last will of that person. It's got to do with contact. My advice always be open, do not hide. Be someone appointed you as an NGO, and that also gives a responsibility which you need to stand for. Foreign aspects of a legacy. I once executed a legacy in Greece. There was a Dutch lady who died in Greece, and she had appointed her niece in the Netherlands as executor. But her niece said, I will be the executor with a house in the Netherlands. But this lady moved to Greece a couple of years before she died. So that niece said, I'm not executing anymore. Now, there was a certain NGO who was the only heir. They asked me to help. I cannot, of course not, I'm not the executor. I cannot do everything in Greece, but what I did, at some stage I went to Greece after having found a good legacy, a good lawyer who could help me. And with him, we went for 2 days to this village somewhere in the Peloponnesus in Greece, visiting the bank, the local registry, the friends visiting the house, looking real estate agents. So it's foreign legacies are fine. You can accept them, but there especially you need to be sure that you don't take the wrong steps. For example, in Greece, that was a very, very high tax. It's kind of a property tax, which still was property taxes are often due, even if you as an NGO do not have to pay taxes for legacies. There can be taxes on the property, and in Greece that's quite high. So by accepting the legacy, the NGO also became liable for these taxes. So you need to know that the value of the house is more than the taxes you need to pay. And at some stage, we really wanted to sell the house before the end of the year, because otherwise in the new year, the new property tax would again become due, it would still be positive, but the legacy would become smaller. But that's a local tax law that I'm not aware of. It's only by inviting the right expert that you know that you don't take unnecessary risk, or as an NGO you can never become liable to pay taxes somewhere. Your donors don't pay for taxes of someone who died. They pay donors for animal welfare purposes. And the final note here as a tip I put down there: everybody has a legacy. Although I mentioned that you can encounter legacies where you have problems. Everybody has a legacy. There are an awful lot of legacy. The majority of legacies, they go fine. So although that's my legal background, I always have to point at the risks. Be aware the world of legacies. It's a huge world in the Netherlands, but other countries. I think Tina already mentioned it also. The number of people, the elderly, the group of elderly people becomes bigger. Still becomes bigger every year. And in the Netherlands, it's the richest generation the Netherlands has ever seen. There was millions, hundreds of thousands of millions euros of legacies, which will fall open the coming 10 years. So do not be although I mentioned some risk there. If you get sick, if you make sure that when there could be a problem, that you seek the right advice, then it's really worthwhile to enter this world. And then sometimes it's the final note. People sometimes, when I thank people, also when during live talking with people who want to leave money to their NGOs, they thank the NGO. Then you want to thank on behalf of the NGO, but what they do, they say, no, I am thanking the NGO for giving me an opportunity to leave my estate. Sometimes you help people because they don't have anybody, and then when they know that their legacy will go to a foundation that they are fond of, that they have a good relationship with, they are relieved and say, okay, fine, I now have my last will. Not that they will die the next day, but they are content that they have arranged it. So if you've not already step in and seek the advice only when it's really necessary. No, that was Dave, my presentation. I don't know.
Could you stop sharing your screen and so we can see everyone? I am conscious that we've gone over time, so if anyone needs to go, that's fine.
Yeah, I only said thank you to everybody and then the hele stoppen. Yeah.
Great, and that was really helpful. Yeah. I mean, a great follow on as well from Tina's presentation. And for anyone here who didn't see that, when I send the video of this to the email group, I'll include a link for that video as well, which was talking more about how do you get people to think about actually leaving a legacy. But I was really interested to hear that half of the legacies that come in, you don't even know that they're coming. So it's a really strange kind of fundraising in a sense that it sits there amongst everything you're saying and doing, and you'll never know what piece of copy or what website article or what press release or made someone think, oh, right, so it's always got to be there when you're talking. And
that's a final. Yeah, good that you mentioned that. I've yesterday I thought, I put that in the presentation. I forgot in the last moment. In the communications of the NGOs, talking about legacies also helps getting legacy. If you mention that sometimes NGOs have an interview with someone who will leave his or her legacy. Also in your communication, perhaps you can explain that you've been involved in a legacy, sometimes without mentioning a name, but just people are sometimes looking, people are sometimes are not thinking about their lost will, but then suddenly reading the communication of the NGO, they think, it's possible to leave my estate to the NGO. I never thought of that. I thought I don't have a lot of family. Should I give it to friends? But the friends are old, so why should I give a lot of money to someone who's already 80 or 90 years old? So also make sure in your communication keep talking about it. Don't talk once. Also consistency. Show that it happens more often. Will also create more awareness. Yeah, sorry, Dave. That was
No,
yeah.
that's great. Does anyone else have any questions before we end the call?
I had that question if you recommended to talk about among the supporters, and the other thing, do you know which are the most common types of relationships between the people that gives the legacy and the NGOs that receives it? I mean, are they supporters, long-term supporters, or new supporters, or?
That's a good question. Yeah, and funnily enough, I'm not a fundraiser. The database fundraisers, they will probably. What I do know is this. What I hear often, this 50% that you don't know of. But what I sometimes hear, that between the moment that someone makes his or her last will and the moment he or she dies, there was an average of 7 years. I sometimes hear in the world. But I believe there are people who can be a donor, only can have been a donor for the last year, or can have been a donor for 30 years already. But percentage, I do not know percentages. It's only you can be surprised. I do know that you can be surprised that you think. Also about the amount, there's an organization I helped was informed, and the organization said, "Yeah, we know something about that person, but it's probably that person doesn't have a lot of money." It was an organization who knew the person, had seen that person, and thought, that person doesn't have any money. But perhaps we accept it because we know that person. It appeared that that person had 400,000 euros in the bank, but didn't show off it. But the person had perhaps inherited a lot of money at some stage, never talked about it. So you never know. Also, sometimes rather not poor people, but people with a small pension can suddenly have, or a legacy, or in the Netherlands, the housing prices went up a lot the last years. Very common people with an average pension suddenly have a house, and every house in the Netherlands is already worth a few 100,000 euros. And that it's a very modest person with no big salary, no big pension, but perhaps bought a house 40 years ago or inherited a house. And if that's in Amsterdam or Utrecht or one of the bigger cities, but sometimes also in villages, the prices have gone up tremendously in the Netherlands. So you can never from the outside see what someone of how much someone has.
Yep. Right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
And obviously, it's the kind of subject where the questions come later, I guess, when you're actually doing it. So obviously, there might be the possibility of coming back to you later if there's any questions or clarifications, or if any of the partners want to engage your services if they need some more help in that regard as well. That's obviously another option as well. Okay, great. Well, I'm conscious we are quite a bit over time, but that's not your fault. That's my fault for starting late, and we had questions in the middle.
No problem.
Really, really useful. And we'll get this out to the rest of the partners. And I think just generally webinars on fundraising, it's something that we'll try and do more of in the future. I know that everyone's really keen to talk about the animal care and all those sorts of things, but without the money, then there's not a lot more we can do. So we'll keep doing this series of webinars. Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very much. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.